If the colonizing efforts were designed to engage us all, the decolonizing project should concern us all. To find openings and spaces for decolonization, or for molecular revolutions to subvert the colonization project, we would first need to look into the colonial structures, patterns, mechanisms that are alive and well, what Aníbal Quijano described as the coloniality of power, and the creativity, sensibility, and solidarity that decolonizing brings to all of us, including former colonialist nations. The session today will focus on examples of the mechanisms of colonialism and of the decolonization of knowledge production and use in global health. Recognizing that decolonizing implies an ongoing process, a dynamic activity, without a clear path forward, without recipes, our speakers will address specific concerns and experiences that inform their interest in decolonizing global health. David McCoy. He is the Evidence to Policy Research Lead at the United Nations University's International Institute for Global Health, based in Malaysia. He was Professor of Global Public Health at Queen Mary University, London, and before that he was Director of MedAct, a UK-based global health charity. He worked in the UK and South Africa as a medical doctor and a public health practitioner. He has a doctorate from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and he's a former trustee and current advisor to the Center for Health in the Public Interest. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Great. Okay, well, thank you, first of all, to the organizers for inviting me to speak at the session, and also thank you to all of you for attending this session. I'm going to kick off this conversation about decolonizing knowledge production and utilization by not so much talking about that specifically, but rather speaking about the systems and the structures of knowledge production and utilization. And specifically, I want to talk about the higher education sector and the role of universities in knowledge production and utilization. Now, the higher education sector is, of course, important when we are having a conversation about coloniality and decolonization. Not only is the higher education sector a space that may itself be colonized, but also the production of knowledge outputs, the production of research, the construction of narratives and ideas can be used as instruments to dominate and to subjugate and to colonize. Now, before I speak about the higher education sector, I do want to quickly say a couple of words about this word colonialism that we've just discussed in the plenary session, and that is being bandied around quite a bit within global health discourses. I define colonialism as consisting of two things. One is it's a relationship between a group that is able to dominate and subjugate and exploit another group in order to enable for the extraction and misappropriation of resources. So you need those two things, those two elements, for it to be a colonial relationship. And of course, resources may be natural in the form of minerals, oil, physical assets. They can be human in the form of indentured labor, or in the past, slaves. They can be financial, and they can be intangible. Knowledge is a resource that can also be appropriated and extracted and then used to support colonial relationships. I want to speak about neocolonialism as an indirect form of colonialism. This is the ability to subjugate, to extract indirectly through, for example, using economic power to buy assets and using economic power to monopolize and control markets. And of course, as I mentioned as I said at the earlier plenary session, I think what we have today is a new form of financial and corporate colonialism, which has produced these kinds of extraordinary in extraordinary data, 8 billionaires owning the same amount of wealth as the poorest 3.6 billion people. And I don't know why this keeps moving. Okay, and part of this contemporary colonialism is not so much, it is partly about the colonization of lands and the colonization of resources, physical resources, but it's also about the colonization of economic sectors, because we have a globalized economy. And this is why we talk about big food, we talk about big pharma, we talk about big tech, we talk about big oil, because we have these transnational actors that dominate, monopolize entire global economic sectors. This is the linkage to globalization. So hence the need to think about the geography of contemporary colonialism as being global. Most of the world's billionaires are indeed located in high-income countries, but these are individuals who are now no longer tethered to any country. They own properties in multiple countries, and they live in a supranational space where they are almost unaccountable to national laws. Similarly, we see a growing number of people who are subjugated, who are poor, who are living in precarity, growing in numbers in high-income countries, just as we see them in low-income countries. So again, we need to think about the geography of colonialism. So the higher education sector has also been subject to neoliberal globalization. The higher education sector is now a competitive global market. The higher education sector is a space where we see the brain drain reflect an extraction of human resources from poor countries to rich countries. And of course, the global education sector is very influential in producing the narratives that help to sustain this global economic system that currently produces so much concentration of wealth on the one hand and so much immiseration on the other hand. So that's just the context. What I want to now kind of talk about is one instrument by which we see coloniality and colonialism being expressed through the higher education sector. And specifically, I want to talk about global university rankings. This is a relatively new phenomenon. Over the last 20 years, we've seen universities all across the world being ranked. We see the production of league tables, the top universities, the bottom universities, and there's a whole bunch of universities that aren't even ranked or measured at all. We've seen a proliferation of private for-profit organizations doing the rankings, and we've seen a multiplicity of rankings. So we have global world rankings. We also have regional rankings. We have Asian rankings, African rankings. We have rankings by subject matter. We have rankings for old universities. We have rankings for universities that are less than 50 years old. There's been this proliferation of rankings. And they're increasingly influential. These rankings guide government decisions about which universities to fund, and they influence both students and academic staff about which universities they should go to and which universities they should choose to study at. I want to talk briefly about the three most influential global rankings produced by the Times Higher Education, by a group called the Shanghai Rankings Company, and QS. These are the three dominant world rankers. And very briefly, just to describe, how do they do rankings? Thank you. They do rankings by creating a quantitative score of university performance. They give you a score and they put you on a league table. This is how the Shanghai Rankings does its ranking of universities. It talks about the number of staff who've had Nobel Prizes or field medals. This is a prize for mathematics. The number of alumni who've had those awards. Highly cited researchers, publications in Nature and Science, and a number of articles indexed in a variety of citation indices and productivity. You can see here it's very heavily focused on research. There is no measure of teaching, and there's no measure of the performance of a university in terms of its social functions. The social functions of a university might include helping to inform public debate, helping to hold governments accountable through research and evaluation, helping to reduce social inequality. None of that matters. This is the Shanghai rankings. Times Higher Education is a little bit better in that it includes teaching in its measure of university performance, but again, very heavily focused on research and very heavily focused on particular kinds of research. Research that appears in high impact journals and predominantly journals that operate in the English language. So I haven't got too much time to go into the details of how rankings are constructed, but the product of these rankings can to some extent be seen in this graphic here. Amongst the 200 world best universities identified by Shanghai rankings, only 40 were in Asia, none were in Africa, one in Latin America. And you can see the dominance of the US and Europe and the UK. And similarly with Times Higher Education, the dominance of the high-ranking universities in the US and the UK, and the scarcity of universities in Africa or Asia or Latin America. None of these rankings, by the way, make any adjustments for the wealth of a university. Yeah? So if you're rich, you're going to do well. So there's no adjustment for your socioeconomic status. Neither is there any adjustment for your social and political context. A university in a fragile state or a state that may be suffering from civil conflict or war will be disadvantaged as a result of that. So we have produced a briefing paper that was published last year that talks about the biases and the coloniality of the system of ranking universities. And it's available, and so if you're interested in understanding this phenomenon a bit more, please do have a look at it. We have also, as of 2 months ago, after we convened an independent expert group of people working in global health, but also working in education policy, produced a statement summarizing the 9 problems associated with these global rankings, and then talking about alternatives and changing the system which currently reinforces inequalities in higher education, and it also reinforces biases in favor of the English language, biases in favor of the natural sciences over the social sciences, and biases in favor of the kinds of research that are published in particular kinds of academic journals. So again, this is available on the website. We're not saying that universities should not be evaluated. We're not saying that we shouldn't try and assess and even measure the performance of universities. But what we are saying is that we should get rid of a system that encourages this idea of league tables with winners and losers, and a system that reinforces historical and contemporary inequalities in the broader political economy. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Angel, it feels almost like a badge of honor where our continents are, right? Next, we have Professor Tiki Pang. He's an Indonesian citizen, a visiting professor at National University of Singapore, and has a PhD in immunology and microbiology. He has an extensive career in biomedical sciences and public health, contributing to significant WHO reports and research on infectious disease, global health policy, and health research systems. He's also a seasoned educator and consultant in health sector and has a history in global health leadership, including as Director of Research Policy and Cooperation at the World Health Organization, Chair of the Board of Directors of the Asia Pacific Pacific Leaders Malaria Alliance, and the Southeast Asia Community Observatory. He's presently co-chair of the Asia Pacific Immunization Coalition. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Elaine. Always hard to follow up on David McCoy. I think David's set the scene very nicely. So I'm going to go and dive in straight into the theme of this session, which is knowledge production and utilization. What you see on the slide here is what David's already mentioned. Research output measured by publications is one of the, let's say, generally accepted measure of research productivity. As you can see here, the high-income countries, although having only 16% of the population of the world and 10% of the disease burden in the context of DALYs, they produce nearly 80% of the publications globally, okay? You compare that with the lower middle and the low-income countries, which have 50% of the world population, 60% of the disease burden, and yet contribute only 4% of the knowledge production in terms of publications. So clearly there's a big gap happening here, okay? But obviously I think this audience doesn't need reminding that this kind of analysis has a lot of limitations. Firstly, of course, as already mentioned by David, it probably measures most publications in the English language, MESH, PubMed, whatever. It ignores, for example, any literature, for example, produced in China or in the Spanish-speaking part of the world. Okay, so there's the language bias. What's more important to me is that it is indicative of production of knowledge which is sort of formal. It ignores a lot of very important knowledge at the local level. Okay, what we call gray literature, for example, thesis, unpublished conference reports, but perhaps more importantly, local knowledge, indigenous knowledge, what we call know-how, which is hardly ever written, which is passed down from one generation to the next, okay? A lot of the huge traditions around traditional medicine in China, Ayurveda in India, in most low and lower middle income countries, we have a tradition of traditional sources for medicine. So I think that's the second weakness of this kind of analysis. And finally, of course, there's a big jump from equating publications to disease burden. Okay, that's a correlation, it's not a causation. So many other factors involved. Now, what is the reason for this? Now, obviously, it's clear that in many low and low middle income countries, there is a lack of viable and quality research institutions. There's not enough research facilities, not enough researchers, not enough funding for research. And there's probably a lack of political commitment on the part of many governments. But all the above that I mentioned is linked to a key reality, and that is a lack of investment. If I can go to the next slide, hold on maybe. Okay, now this is very simple. It's a snapshot of R&D in terms of percentage of GDP, okay? And you can clearly see here, between the high-income countries in dark brown and the low and lower middle-income countries, that basically governments are not investing sufficiently in research. So to me, here's a reality. I think we can blame the colonization of research, that everything happens in the high-income elites. My message is the countries, the low and lower middle-income countries must also do their bit. They are not doing enough, okay? It is not just a one-way street of blaming the elites, maybe the elite universities in the West, but the countries themselves, in those which are not investing enough in research, must really up their game. I think that's a key message that's often forgotten. Okay, so basically, I think the other problem is what was nicely mentioned in the previous panel, which is the importance of the fact that Western paradigms don't always work. So that really adds to the importance of research which is done in the local context, okay? Because a lot of that is probably not captured. I think Renu Khanna said this nicely. Western paradigms don't always work. Now the second part of this session is around utilization of knowledge. I'm not going to say very much on this because I think we'll have some nice examples afterwards. But I think David already alluded this. When you talk about utilization or use of knowledge, you're talking about the whole area of knowledge translation, okay? And it is not just the traditional biomedical, clinical, epidemiological, or even public health research that's captured by that first graph that I showed you. A lot of that is around behavioral and implementation sciences and research, which is often very rarely done well in the low and lower middle income countries. So that sort of adds, I think to the problem. But let me finish by going back to that idea of the importance of local knowledge by just reminding you of the old adage. Okay, it's not there. Okay, but I had one more slide which basically said that knowledge may be global, but the use of knowledge is always local. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tiki. Next, we have Angel Mendy, who holds a PhD in social sciences and focuses on the internal and international mobility and migration of African health professionals and the impact on the provision of healthcare to populations. She's a former Takemi Fellow in International Health at Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, where she currently supports Jesse Bump's research on the historical roots of health inequalities, the logic of domination of resources, and the control of medical knowledge in global health in Africa. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Irene, for introducing me. As Irene said, my presentation today is going to focus on the perverse effect of global health policies and perpetuating health inequalities in sub-Saharan. So it's important to locate this research in the Jesse Bump project where I'm part. My presentation, so based on finding from, as I said, Jesse Bump project in Africa. So what I'm going to present is a critical finding that deeply questions the need to decolonizing health policies. And the title that best expressed what we are discussing here is perverse effect of global health policies and the inequalities in sub-Saharan. So what this mean? Well, it's important to recall the context of the presentation. First of all, we were studying the, just let me use it, okay. So we were studying the historical roots and factors explain the perpetuation of health inequalities. At the same time, what we did is 3 years of research, trying to use the policy and discuss analysis, interview with key authorities, policymakers, scholars, senior scholars, and we also exploit the archive related to the health policies in Africa, but in the international perspective. And this research concerned 15 African countries. We just studying key documents. So what we consider is what we call the poverty reduction strategies papers. I think you know it after the Sustainable Development not sustainable, the adjustment programs. This is a program that have been implemented by the World Bank to fund health, at the same time to fight against poverty. The other document well known is the Millennium Development Goal related to health, and we consider all the goals related to health. That was goal 4, 5, and 6. And we also consider the goal 3 related to the Sustainable Development Goal. And now the key element here is the African National Health Policies Plan. So 15 countries, 4 different key documents where we find the key health policies of African country. That is all about. So what we're going to discuss here, based on the key finding we have from this research I just evoked at the beginning, one of the main conclusion and key information coming from data is that the implementation of global health policies relate to the documents, and the key documents I just stressed out before perpetuate health inequalities and inequities. How we came on this finding, it's just like in this document, we realize that there are the same health priorities for all African countries, even though the health need may be different. I will take the example of Senegal later. And if you have just to identify who define or who formulate, who gave resources and produce knowledge, so we are in a global north. And then who sets the priority, health priorities? These health priorities come from the global health policies. And we find these health priorities in the document I just mentioned before, Millennium Development Goals, Sustainable Development Goal, public-private partnership. And at the same time, findings show that some disease and health issues generate more global financial resource and transaction, and all of these involve and profit than others. And we can take the example of maternal health care, child health, HIV, AIDS, and so on. So this is a key element of this discussion I would like to just stress out. The consequences of focusing on the global health policies rather than the one defined in a national health policies plan implemented and formulated by countries, and that those documents underline clearly the need of the population. These consequences led us to conclude that there is less attention in a real need, national health need, as reflected in this national health policy plan. What does mean national policy plan? It's just like a document that may be qualified as the identity in health need, health program, health policies, health strategies of one country, specific country. So we analyze 15 of these national health plan. What are the priority of these countries is prevention, health policy, effective health system with resilient structures, qualified human resource, health infrastructure, focus on health need of local population. And we won't find this if you consider the global health policies that are generally have been formulated by donors or just United Nations agencies and promoted in these international health programs. The other consequences is the voluntary alignment of national health priority with donor-derived programs. And if I take the case of Senegal, I'm just gonna give one example and reserve the other one for discussion. If we consider Senegal framework in terms of saying this is our priority in health, we will see that Senegal in terms of HIV has kind of low percentage But since decades, the Senegal health system and government receive, or the country receive much attention on financing HIV health. Why we have a high neonatal mortality, we have some of the local infection diseases that kill babies, kill infants, and also kill youth. But for this, it's still like we have the same thing. We have the same percentage, maybe less years after years, but all the funding goes to the most important, like partner health policies. This is a big issue for countries. And what we may say here, it's just seeing how decades by decades, even countries need just to focus on what partner want, what partner define as 15 years implement policies that will be implemented, and all countries try now to adapt their national health need based on it, because they know that if they don't do it, they won't receive any fund just to fund their health system. We're talking about the WHO talk about the resiliency of health system, and in the other cases, it's just like talking about disease that we have to fight again. So this is one issue I would like to underline in a discussion with the case, also with the case of the Gambia, that really illustrate how when the health system work without the donor attention, it just collapsed. Thank you so much.
Introduction?
Oh, I thought I was going to introduce you later.
Maka dikeluarilah oleh orang Kelantan, lalu berperang, beramuk-amukan, terlalu sabur. Rupa kilat cahaya senjata seperti kilat di langit, sabung menyabung, gemuruh bunyi bahana tempik hulu balang, dan gemerencing bunyi senjata.
Out they came, the people of Kelantan, and they battled, running amok. The weapons shining like thunder in the sky. Thunderous, deafening were the cries of the chieftains and the jiggling of the weapons.
Maka penjurit yang 200 itu pun kelihatanlah dilihat orang. Mengamuk terlalu banyak seperti ribut datangnya, tiada berputusan datangnya.
The soldiers, numbering some 200, appeared to the people to run amok like a huge storm with no end. Eliani Abdul Rahman is a New American Open Technology Institute Fellow, a PEO International Peace Scholar, and a final year doctoral student in public health at Harvard University. Her focus includes AI, public health, and online child safety. She has gained recognition for her activism against online hate speech and for child safety, receiving multiple awards and fellowships. Eliani also co-funded Yakin, a nonprofit for child sexual abuse survivors, and was a founding member of Twitter's Trust and Safety Council until she resigned in protest against the increase in hate speech.
Thank you for the introduction. So you heard just now excerpts from our ancient Malay classical texts. Our identify as Malay, and so these are some of our texts. Malay amok that you've heard, amok you know from the English meaning it means to run amok, to go crazy. But in my language, it's actually imbued with courage and honor, because it was a way to defend our lands from the colonizers. We will fight to our deaths. This is my land, the Malay Archipelago, Melayu Raya, present-day Brunei, Indonesia, Singapore, and Malaysia. So what the British colonizers did when they came to our lands was that they took a collective martial strategy to defend our lands and pathologized it into an individual mental health condition, to the point where, I will explain in the next few slides, it became embedded in the DSM. In 1850, it was deemed a psychiatric disorder. So you can see here that AMOC was defined in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is used by American Psychiatric Association in America. So it's called DSM-4, which is not the latest edition. So this was used as late as 2013. AMOC was first described in Malaysia as that consists of homicidal frenzy. And I will let you read the rest of it. But basically, the term AMOC comes under the category of a culture-bound syndrome. And I will quote here that is deemed a culture-bound syndrome because it's based on, quote, remote primitive island tribes, unquote, close. And as a public health student, Malay public health student, I want to reclaim this term AMOC and to address the pejorative reframing by the British colonizers. So I just want to go back to the category of the CBS, the culture-bound syndrome, that was used in the previous edition of the DSM-4. And how it's actually defined is that it's any pattern, mental illness or behavior that's unique to the specific ethnic or cultural population. So obviously, as a person of Malay descent, I object strongly to this categorization. That AMOC's invented meaning would actually be embedded in the DSM and be defended by professionals as late as 2013, to me is very disconcerting. The good news is that in the latest edition, which is the DSM-5, it has been removed. But at the same time, the culture-bound syndrome category has now been replaced by this new concept, or cultural concepts of distress. You can see on the slide what it means and how they define it. But the existence of this CCD as a category is othering, is it not? So I argue for its removal. First of all, culture should not be a catch-all term to describe what is not universal. What is universal? And the second thing is that psychiatry has not established clear criteria for the cultural specificity of a mental syndrome. I conclude here. Thank you.
Last but not least, Maria Mison is a multidisciplinary artist and an indigenous folk healer from the Philippines. With a background in theater and game pedagogy, Maria integrates healing and educational techniques through various art forms. Maria is concerned with translating ancestral wisdom for the urban context and cross-culturally for clients and communities from different faiths and backgrounds.
Hello, I'm very grateful for being provided this platform. I also request everybody to be very patient with me because I feel like this is a kind of room that I'm usually not in, right? One of the things that I would like to point out is that we don't call knowledge knowledge in indigenous contexts. We call it wisdom. What's the difference? Wisdom is earned, is held by elders, is integrated down to the body, down to the heart, down to the gut, right? If you don't incorporate to the physical what you know, it's just indigestion. How many of us in this conference were indigested? How many were constipated? How many feel like they're lived and involved in our conversations? This is a kind of knowledge and wisdom that we might not know how to apply yet. In many ways, wisdom isn't really that codified. Why? Because you have to earn it. We keep it secret and give you exactly what you're ready for. Because it's a holy thing. It's a sacred thing to be in a circle and to know something, to be in knowing. So the thing is that we have a biased perspective from the industrial times of what we perceive to be knowing, what we perceive to be knowledge. And the thing is, to graduate into wisdom, it kind of needs to descend into the heart. If we can feel what we're saying, if we can embody, live out throughout our lives what we've come to know. Now, the thing is, we've gained a lot of information in this conference. There's a lot of breaking with trust. There's a lot of discourse around geopolitics. It's very overwhelming. Sometimes it's triggering. Sometimes you're angry. Sometimes you don't know what to do. And the thing is, it is asking us to be able to sit with all of that. The first meeting I went to was about peace, and it talked about Yemen, Gaza, and Ukraine in one swoop, 1 hour. And the gravity of the room was so heavy. And it was like, are we capable of holding that grief? Or are we gonna like export that to psychotherapists? Are we gonna export that to art therapists? Now the thing is, in indigenous cultures, that's one person. Our physicians shouldn't be emotionally ill, shouldn't be emotionally unwise. The political advisors of earlier times were also healers. So I know that I was talking to a few researchers and they were saying, I'm not used to talking so big picture. We're so used to instruments and specific case papers. And I'm like, I understand. But at the same time, we used to occupy this role. Anybody in this room who is involved in health has the archetype of the healer. We were once occupying the role of being concerned for the whole community. And the thing is that I know that for a lot of people, these big words, geopolitics, economic, financial instruments, there's like bankers, there's like loan lenders. I know it can be a lot, but I would like to provide an idea. I know that we all come from different contexts. I was talking to Indonesian people, Thai people, and they were saying, we all do traditional indigenous medicine, but sometimes it's just, we don't research on it that much because it's hard to measure or it's secret. So if you have like an auntie who told you a message from your dead grandparent, that's not on your paper, but it could change your life, right? The dog and the family on your phone, that's not a research paper. That cannot be explained through metrics, right? So there has to be this holiness around what we cannot know traditionally. We need to have a comfort with what is unknown, with what is a mystery, because that is also a healing element. And I know to some people this could be like, oh, that's a lot. And I'm like, but if you look at psychotherapy, you look at Carl Jung, he codified this. If you look at psychotherapists, they talk about this. So there is a convergence of the techniques and modalities that we need to engage with. And I know that it's like, I need to be competent with all of these things and I need to integrate all of these things. Oh my God, I'm like, I'm doing too much. So I'd like to offer this very simple statement. Life knows how to move with life. Sometimes we get bogged down by a lot of ideas and frameworks and logic of how to do things. But if we can sit with who we are as life, we can meet with life. We can have these meetings with life, right? And I would like to invite everybody to kind of sense into this room or into your body, where do you feel open or that you have knowing, that you have wisdom, that you have knowledge? And when you sense and sit there, what images come to mind? What actions? What forgiveness? What kind of transitions do you feel is potent for you, right? And you just move from there. That is how the elders moved. And I know that for a lot of, I deeply understand that some people are coming from programming perspectives, pure research perspectives, but I would like to offer that these models of knowing is present in Aborigine, in North American traditional cultures. It's kind of funny for me when I have clients that are across the world and we think the same way. So it's very, I would like to offer to everyone to just try it. And if you're desperate, to lean on it. And yes, that's all I would like to say, and I'm very grateful. And I Also would like to invite anybody with questions, because I know that this might be a very different way of thinking about things. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Yes, we would like to invite questions from the audience. We expect the panelists also to talk to each other, but we would like a catalyzing question, but I see everybody's sitting down and Renzo is not in the room, so no, I'm kidding. Oh, we do have oh, Renzo, you are here. Okay, but it's fine. You've made enough questions the entire conference. Yes, please.
Thank you. Hello, everybody, and thank you for your great speech, everyone. My name is Mariana. I'm from Brazil, and it has been very interesting to hear all this discussion about the production of knowledge. And I was in the morning in another session where they were saying about traditional medicine. That's my background. And thank you for your speech, because it's really important to connect with ourselves. It's such a congress that invites us to rethink the way we have been behaving. And my question to discuss here with you is like how traditional medicine that we have been known so far and produced evidence, lots of evidence. I still have to hear in the sessions that, oh no, we need to invent new ways of doing things. But we have been doing evidence maps and different methodologies in qualitative research and with looking at the material, as the case in Africa, that we have problems. And I would know how we can progress from that. For example, I'm a professor in a university, and every time we win points in a scale, we publish, and we are so happy. And we still have a long way to go, so I would like to hear your thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't want Nina to stand up the entire time that we answer. So Nina, can you throw your question as well, and then you can comfortably sit down.
Thank you. Probably standing up would be good for me because I've been sitting down so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Nina Vandermark. I'm a research fellow at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, which is, as we know, an institution with strong colonial origins and is one of the first institutes of that kind. For me, this is referenced in the plenary as well, this need for co-production and equitable research partnerships to kind of shift the power dynamics when it comes to knowledge production and utilization. I'm currently on a joint project with another university, and for me, it's just really important to get your perspectives on what an equitable research partnership would look like, any best practices, and any challenges that you might have experienced within your career, or maybe even from the floor. So I'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So we will begin with the healing question, right? I think that was directed to you, Maria.
That last one?
No, the other one, about the, yes.
Yeah. Honestly, there's a term called poesis, called learning by doing. So I feel like when people keep asking you for research, ask them to do it with you, and maybe they learn faster. It's here and here instead of here. And I feel like I know that it feels idealistic or sentimental, but the thing is, if we stay up here, nothing will happen. So, yeah. I also want to comment on the last note in terms of like, how do you know if it's equitable? Notice the bodies you're with if they're shutting down. If they feel unsafe with you, I also wanted to mention in my talk a while ago that we really need to resensitize our bodies in terms of being able to respond and connect with each other. The reason why we have so much exploitation is we're so dead to the data. We're so, I just want to dissociate from it. We don't feel involved with everybody. So even the fact that that's a question means that you don't feel connected with people. You can't check that is everybody feeling just in the room. So, yeah.
Thank you, Maria. I think David is looking at me. You want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, is this on? Yeah. I worked as a clinician in the early 1990s in South Africa, in a rural hospital at the time that HIV was exploding. And I did my master's thesis looking at how the private sector, how the government sector, and how the traditional healers of the community dealt with sexually transmitted infections. And that was my entry point into thinking about how we fuse medicine with public health, with community health, how we fuse the physical dimensions of illness with the spiritual, cultural, and social dimensions. But what we have now in the field of medicine, and both in terms of practice and academic medicine, are two forces that in a way is shifting us away from that holistic approach to health and medicine. One is the biomedical imperialism that we have, which kind of imposes a particular epistemology on the entire field. And the second is the commercial forces that are seeking to commodify and commercialize everything in the health sector. So I come back to this, everything that you've said, and everything that you've said. And I always end up with the structural forces that are preventing us from doing something that is more appropriate, less colonial, and more holistic. So I feel like a broken record. I keep thinking we have to go upstream, because we're seeing also is this financialization in the higher education sector. We're seeing the financialization in the health sector. If you think about the NHS in England, publicly financed, publicly provided, free at the point of use, that's disappeared because we have financial actors seeking to convert the NHS into something through which it can extract profit. We're seeing that in higher education, a number of private universities that are cropping up everywhere. You have Trump University in the US. That kind of model of education is now proliferating all across the world. And again, these are financial actors that are driving this. Times Higher Education, that ranks universities, that tells all of us what a good university is and isn't, is not an educational company. It's owned by private equity. They're owned by financial actors whose only interest is extracting double-digit profits from the higher education sector.
Thank you, David. Angel, it looks like you also want to pitch in.
Thank you so much, David, for bringing this compliment. I just would like to share in production knowledge 2 examples. The first one is as Africans coming from Senegal, an African country, when the psychiatrist at the hospital try to heal a patient with disorder, maybe you are not familiar with these cases. When they can't, they call the healers, traditional healers. For some us, it's a normal thing because we know that traditional medicine help. And during centuries and centuries, our ancestors use it. But what we note in Africa is the dichotomy they put between traditional and modern. Even doctors, health professionals, some of them try to maintain it. For why they maintain it? Because if they promote the traditional medicine, it's just like they think that population won't use the modern medicine. This is the first thing. The other thing that Jesse here in the room has a project called African Narrative Project. Lynn and I gather papers from all around Africa, written by Africans. And one of the paper catch her attention. It's from Benin. The scholar tried to explain in the Aja community what the healer means. And it's just like, I think, 1.5 pages without references. They are 2 scholars, PhD scholars, interview 123 healers, transcribing what the concept means, the words they are using. It's like amazing when you are reading it. We learn a lot about this paper. Hopefully, I think it's going to be publishing. But in a normal standard, as you said, the first thing they're going to ask, where are the references? They don't feel the academic writing. Probably no journal will accept to publish it. But I think, Jesse, you will try to just help and convince that it's a scientific paper using maybe the unusual knowledge that we won't quote, that we won't use in the academic world. Thanks.
Thank you, Jill. I see you did show up, Renzo, but I think you were there first. No, he was first. Okay. Yes.
Irene is trying to silence me, just kidding.
I called you, actually. That's why you're here.
Very grateful. And I'll be quick, Renzo Ginto. At maraming salamat. No? And I just said that because it feels so great to say something in your own language in a global health session. And I hope that we will do more and more of that in a very English-dominated global health space. You know, so that's my first point. But second, Maria, I was so struck when you said that and she's my compatriot. I was struck when you said that indigenous wisdom is earned. Yeah. And right now, what I'm seeing in the global or even planetary health field, you know, everybody's now talking about integrating, incorporating indigenous knowledge, wisdom into our perhaps Western-orientated, you know, scholarship and work. You know, I'm now guilty because I'm part of a group doing a scoping review of indigenous interventions for building climate-resilient health systems. And if these knowledge or wisdom is secret and needs to be earned, right? I think there's a tension there. You have universities, especially in America, trying to build departments of ethnic and indigenous studies. And we can go back to Lynn. You know, Western psychiatry stole a very indigenous concept of amok. So I guess my question is, how do we navigate this tension, you know, as part of decolonization without disrespecting, you know, age-old indigenous wisdom, but making sure that you're also not invisibilized? Happy to hear your thoughts.
Ang ganda ng question. It's nice
She
question.
spoke in Tagalog too.
I want to say that we have this concept called wisdom bodies, and they cannot die. Literally, when Buddha sits there and he gains enlightenment, it exists in the firmament forever. It's always accessible. If you're open, you're connected, poof, like that. So that's how we talk to ancestors. That's how we access bodies of knowledge via dreams or via initiations, because it's always there. So the thing is, when you can't access it, it means you're not open. It's your readiness. It's not, I know that sounds gatekeeping, but the thing is, Spirit is wise enough to ready you to be able to be open to it. It's so automatic once you're open. But the thing is, when you're not, you're like, I'll have students who will be like, I don't get it. Or like, what do you mean? Like, so it's gonna be, so I feel like, just like a good teacher, you have these steps. You have a little bit of a hard time learning the ropes. But learning the ropes is part of the wisdom. It's kind of like martial arts, wipe in, wipe out. So it's the process that engenders you to open to that kind of community. So for example, being able to access universal knowledge is being open to the universe. So simple, right? Every culture is literally like that. But the thing is, any part of your heart that is close to that will stop you from accessing all of that wisdom, all of it. It will shut itself down. So the thing is, in terms of the processes, I would say collectives have their own bodies. There's like a firmament of what they're ready for / what is prepared. So I feel like when you have a deep listening to what is most needed, yun yung bababa, that is what will descend. It will meet you where you are. When the student is ready, the teacher appears. So I feel like we need to listen where we are, and then you'll get exactly what you'll need. Nothing more, nothing less. No greed in terms of the knowledge, because the process is part of what you need to do. So I feel like when we're trying to engage with these wisdom bodies, also kind of be willing to be a student in the same way that we're all here listening to each other. So if we gain that kind of capacity to listen and to learn, it's so fast, it's so exponential what a group of people can access, learn, move, and engage with. So yeah, that's how I would.
Thank you, Maria. It feels like a traditional algorithm, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's in the cloud.
Lynn, you were going to say something.
Yeah. Thanks, Arenzo, for raising that point. I think the point about languages also is that there is also epistemic violence involved. It's not just simply the word amok was taken from my people and what does it mean. It actually percolates down. This is just one form of violence against my people in the form of colonization. But we ourselves believed in what that meant. We took it in. So there's books written about the Malay dilemma and how we are broken, and this is why we are meant to be the way we are right now, marginalized in Malaysia and Singapore and in various places. So the epistemic violence is really something that we need to talk about much more in certain parts of the world. And I think in my part of the world, where I come from, we're actually not talking enough about it. So thank you for raising that. The other point about indigeneity and how we want to be seen and have voice, good point too about departments, universities, all that stuff. Ask us. We also have ideas and how we want to move and do things. For example, I'm moving now into the space of indigenous AI, because when we do training of data sets, what are we training it on? On centuries of knowledge that is really written by white males. And so I question a lot of that, and so indigenous AI, I'm asking for training of data sets pertaining to our languages. So knowledge is, like you were saying, wisdom, but they're also not captured. So a lot of the oral traditions. So first of all, we have to capture that. We have to find apps and tools in order to capture our languages, and that's being done in Hawaii, for example, in certain places. But indigenous AI is a very, very new thing. It's only the white settled colonies, only happening in America, in Canada, in Aotearoa, New Zealand, in Australia. Singapore is not part of that, neither are the indigenous peoples of Latin America or elsewhere. And so again, even in that community of indigenous AI people, we are still not talking to each other. So it's also like very many layers involved. I think we also need to come up to the ground and decide what is it that we want and how we want to represent ourselves and make our voices heard.
Thank you, Lynn. I think it's also not just the language, but the male paradigm in AI, right? That ChatGPT will understand better or use more the male voice and replicate the male voice. So who was it now? Are we having a fist fight to decide who goes first? Okay.
Yeah, I'm keeping the order. Well, I feel obligated by Renzo to say Sawasdee krap rather than good afternoon then, right? Agriapan, Associate Professor from Mahidol University here in Bangkok, Thailand. Would like to shift the concern a little bit. Maybe this question is for Tiki or perhaps also David. In my career, when we talk about balancing the knowledge, and when you say knowledge is general, but the use of knowledge is local, right? And perhaps it leads to implementation research or those kind of stuff. But in my career, sometimes I feel like we also see a different kind of phenomena, the opposite one, the abuse of decolonization. For example, when we try to adopt some framework from somewhere else, Thai policy maker, perhaps they can say, no, this is not adaptable. This is from foreign. I won't use it. I want something from ground up. And to me, that's kind of lack of opportunity to learn and share among global community. If you search literature about USC from Thailand, it's always positive. We share all the positive, and people would like to see the publication is positive to learn from, right? And whatever not working, and you will come to learn here, maybe it's not publishable, or maybe people don't like to publish. So you can see the tension between, yes, we would like to not be governed by financial corporation ranking like David mentioned, right? We would like to be sharing the knowledge globally and then apply locally. But how would you recommend if you can do a new ranking or if we could have a new framework that balance the local wisdom and sharing in global community and adapt knowledge transfer, things like that. How to prevent go to the far right, to the point of nationalism. I'm going to use only thing we created locally and not sharing or adopting internationally. Thanks.
Thank you. Tiki, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I'll just be very brief. I think it really goes back to what I think Maria said earlier about learning by doing. Okay, and I think the Thais have a very good analogy. I get this from Dr. Suit, who said, you build the ship as you sail it. Okay, and I think having that flexibility of, yes, you have, let's say, the Western frameworks, which is based on experiences of many countries. But then by building the ship as you sail it, you are able to incorporate local knowledge, local wisdom, which, as you say, are sometimes unpublishable. I mean, as you said, we only hear all the nice things about the Thai 30 baht policy, but I'm sure there are many things that you learned as you implemented, that you incorporated without ever having published it in the Lancet or in the New England Journal of Medicine. So that's just a quick answer to that question.
Thank you, Tiki. I think, David, you want to say something?
Yeah, I think it's such an important point here, and I think it really speaks to the idea of yin-yang. These are always tensions. It's not either this is right or that is wrong. So we have to manage the ability to kind of be global, but be local. We've got to accept the wisdom of indigenous cultures, but also the benefits that come from modern science. It's not either or. So for me, this comes back to the issue of wisdom. How you get the right balance is really an issue of wisdom. But I also think with wisdom, we also need to emphasize the whole issue of values. Yeah, that wisdom, you're talking about wisdom that is communitarian, that is social, that is, what's the word, ethical. So I don't think there's a right or wrong with many, many things. And there's a lot of debate that goes on in the decolonizing conversation, which is about right or wrong, good and bad. And I feel that can be sometimes destructive.
If I just want to add on to that, I think sometimes we need to be very clear of what it is that we're also talking about. When we talk about decolonization, into my mind, it's really about centering current power structures. I like to talk about decoloniality, where people who've been colonized, people of color, we think about the future of what we want to have, the vision, and then we work backwards. So it's not as if we're working with the current structures, we're actually looking at the future imaginaries. But of course, it's also a both-and thing. I like to think also about a spectrum. So I think it's always like a both-and question.
I just can't resist to add to this idea of the importance of indigenous wisdom. Jesse, you're in the room? Yeah. Okay. Jesse, I stand to be corrected, but Jesse mentioned this morning the idea of the triangle that moves the mountain. Now, I may be wrong, but my understanding was that actually came from Professor Prawit Wasi in Thailand, who had this idea of the triangle that moves the mountain. Any big problem that you have, you need knowledge, you need community support, and you need political commitment. I may be wrong, maybe a Western philosopher had come up with it before, but that's my understanding. Prof. Vichan, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right. Jesse, apologies for that.
No, that's why I said specifically on stage it was from Thailand. And the mountains I showed were from Thailand. So yeah, that's from Thailand, okay? Yeah, Sawadee ka.
So I'm sorry your legs are hurting, but now I have to add something to the geometrical discussion, because we have the continuum that I understand it goes in a line, and there's two poles, and then there's apparently a Thai triangle. But in the Andean mountains, where I come from, we don't do the binary, and we don't do the triangle. We do the four corners. So we don't do the balance thing. And I think I was telling you, David, specifically, when people say, you know, the balance or the good and the bad, I tell them, I don't understand. That's not how I think. We do something else. So I don't do the balancing act. So please, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Modi Motsama. I work for the Wellcome Trust, so we're a research funder. And first of all, I want to say just congratulations. This is a really fantastic and interesting panel. You were all excellent, and I really learned a lot from all of you. And I would say, actually, speaking now, my questions have mostly been asked, but I will ask them anyway. I guess the first one is really, should traditional medicine be taught alongside modern medicine or health practice as a general rule or approach to training health professionals? And then the second is really around what Renzo was asking, around the research space. Should we be funding research into indigenous traditional knowledge? So those of us who don't practice it can better understand it. Or will doing so be a form of, promoting colonialism, given the way the whole research system is not very, equitably set up and established? And I guess the third one, I was going to ask, recommendations on how we push back against colonization. You've kind of all hinted towards that. But I would ask you, what would be your key recommendations for a science funder in this health space in terms of our approach to decolonizing global health? We have a commitment towards it. We're trying to make progress, but we're a very big and slow institution, and, we're deeply entrenched in the current system. So, yeah, where do we start?
Thank you, Modi. I think Lynn wanted to begin.
Yeah, you were asking about how what was the second question that you had? It was that one.
It was around whether we should fund science into indigenous medicine and knowledge.
Yes, the answer is yes. And the thing is, how are we going to do it together? And there's many different experts here in the room. There's also already evidence about how things can be done, the best practice. But I just want to emphasize how important that is, because Irina was just talking just now about a third way, other ways of looking at things, other ways of knowing. And I think it's so important to talk about that. In terms of, for example, in planetary health, everything is so binary when we look at very neo-colonial knowledge production. Just look at Gaza. It's either a war or it's peace. Why is it not like a third way or a third space? I speak of this because I was also as a diplomat before I switched to my current work. And we need to talk more about third spaces because, for example, when we talk about climate justice, my people, the Malays, when we enter the jungles, we ask the spirit world. We say, atok nenek, grandma, grandpa, grandchild, I, because we don't say I. It's egotistical in the Malay society. So grandpa, grandma, grandchild wants to come in and take whatever. We have a social contract not between the nation state and its people, but between spiritual world and human beings, between human beings and the spirit world. So climate justice to us is centuries old. We have been practicing it for centuries, and we know how it's done. And so then the question really is, what is the researchers among us who are indigenous, what it is that we can proffer to you and say, okay, this is where we come from. So I welcome your question. I think it's a very valid one. And there are people here in this room who can answer your question and say, okay, this is what we proffer in terms of, say, climate justice or in particular spaces in global health. Because we exist, and we know how it's been done, and we have this wisdom.
Thank you. Angel, I don't know if you want to please comment on this.
Yeah, I have one comment related to your second question about recommendation on decolonization, something. I think the first thing is the term of domination and perpetuation of domination. We all know it. We know that when donors gave money to some countries, they put conditions. We know that when they talk about public-private partnership, it's all about money. We know that when we talk about ads, it's all about loan. So this is clear. We need just to shift these issues from a taboo area to the open space discussion. Exactly what we're doing here. We have to dare talking about it, and not just saying, okay, this is a kind of panel, and when we just leave this door, try to forget it. Thank you.
Thank you, Angel. Somebody else wants to pick up the mic?
I'll pick up the first question. There is already training. It's just that I think people need to understand that the mysticism is quite literal. Like, it feels mystical because it's incomprehensible. So the janitor, the random HR girl, they're there. The people who are awake to it, they know. So my clients, they come up to me and be like, I just feel like I need to talk to you. Can you help me? and they didn't even know I'm a practitioner. So it's very, I want to just affirm that we do train, we do find each other, but because of the systematic stresses, we tend to be more secretive. Because of the, like, I feel very privileged that I am, that I'm eloquent enough to explain myself. A lot of local masters cannot, and they do not speak English. So Lynn is correct that we have new contexts. So I park a lot of my more esoteric terms for my more global clients because we need to be of the times. So I feel like maybe not our formal institutions, but also just ascending into the ones that are emerging, that are in these liminal spaces, the in-betweens, and then maybe funding them and listening to them more. I think that's, yeah.
Thank you, Maria. David?
Yeah, Modi, I think that dichotomy between modern medicine and traditional medicine is simplistic, yeah, a very simplistic medicine dichotomy. And also there's a lot of variation within modern medicine and also within what we're describing as traditional medicine. So that's the first point. The question, should the Wellcome Trust study indigenous knowledge systems? My answer is no, because of how that frame would be applied. What I would like to see are indigenous communities studying the Wellcome Trust and its history.
Brilliant.
I do want to add one thing. I agree with you, David. Whatever you do, don't use a damage center approach. Don't try to fix what is broken. Don't try to fill a gap. Don't try to find fault. So the research should have at least that guideline. Any research that is conducted, yeah. That's all I want to say. I don't know if anybody else wants to respond to Modi. No, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. And that last point is really challenging because you start with a research problem or question. But yes, I've noted it.
I think you were next.
Yes, thanks a lot to everyone. You guys have kind of brought a unique axis of thought process, you know, the way the topics were discussed. I want to personally thank each one of you. You guys are amazing. And as a student of previous student of Prof. Tekipang, you know, I'm a researcher as well. You know, I want to share only a personal experience, no questions. You know, I've learned a lot already. But when I was taking care of my a close relative when she was going through cancer treatment, and you know, and cancer treatment can be very brutal, you know, not just for the patient, but for the caretaker. And you know that they put in a long 1-year treatment procedure for you, and you have to see your, you know, your relative go through that, and you have to be very patient. You know, no matter you understand it or not, sometimes. And the medical system, the Western medical system, allopathy can be brutal. You know, they don't understand the situation in which the caregiver is put in. You know, the struggles they go through to not just to fund it, but in the day in and day out process, the mental agony. And when I was, you know, despite having been exposed to Western knowledge, despite having lived my life through the thought process, when this experience struck me and I'm sitting outside the hospital, you know, there is this Ganesha statue, you know, I'm a Hindu, the Ganesha statue outside the hospital, facing the hospital, and I'm facing Ganesha and I'm asking what the hell is going on with my life, you know, and my loved one's life, you know. That is where you see the true contrast. When I was listening to all you guys, it just related to me that way. So it's a real distinguishing factor, the way Western medicine operates, and the way, you know, in an urban setting, when people like me who are not really part of community, you know, because we kind of nuclearize in the urban settings. When that happens, we have no place to go, and we simply have to fall back to our own moral strengths sometimes. So thanks so much. Just sharing my experience. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Lim wants to.
I just want to lift up what you said. Thank you so much for sharing that experience. I was CEO of a nonprofit in Singapore, And we were doing outreach to caregivers of people with mental health illnesses. So to across the island, so like 15 hospitals, different institutions, churches and temples. But I just want to understand what you're saying to the empathy and how difficult that was. But just want to go back again to what we're talking between the dichotomy of Western medicine and how we look at traditional medicine and how we approach things on a spiritual level. I realized that the Malay community, my people, didn't understand dementia. So how they understood dementia was if you didn't read the Quran enough, you will get dementia. And so then I worked with the Islamic Religious Council, with the Mufti, and the CEO happened to be an old school friend. And we did outreach. We trained people who could speak Malay, could reach out to the elders in the mosque. And then the imams were saying to us, can we come in and say certain relevant Quranic quotes at the end of your lessons to the folks coming to the mosque? We said, yes, of course. We want this to be a community effort where people understand things from different perspectives, including at a spiritual level. So I appreciate what also my peers here are saying, that it's not a simple binary between the Western medicine and how we look at things from different perspectives and different spiritual faiths, because we can actually combine it in order to do it in a way where our people that we are approaching, patients, caregivers, understand it and can take the necessary efforts and actions that makes actual sense and actual effective action that will do change in the society, in the community.
Thank you, Lynn.
Hi everyone, this is Wafa from Bangladesh. I'm a research fellow at Bragg School of Public Health. First of all, thank you for the wonderful insights at this panel. My question is a little different from what the discussion is currently on. So it's around equitable partnerships. And to give you brief context, I work in a research consortium called ARISE, where our focus is to build capacity of low-income communities living and working in informal settlements so that they're able to ask for their rights and they're able to hold governance actors accountable. So the initial idea was that we will build capacity of the most marginalized. We'll work together. Our focus is co-production, our focus is community-based participatory research, and that will work with the most marginalized, which is among a vulnerable community, we'll work with the ones that sit the lowest, right? But when we actually went to the field, when we started field work, we realized that there is a power dynamic within the community itself. So it's very hard in reality to really target the ones who are most marginalized. Like we wanted to take them as our community researchers, but they themselves were not comfortable. They were like, if you don't approach him, I cannot go because he is the gatekeeper of my community. So then we had to change our approach. Then we targeted youth from the community who we thought could become the voice for tomorrow. And so we're now working with these youth community co-researchers. So the thing is that we are working together. We are doing participatory methods, and we do see a shift. We do see that capacities are being built. We do see that their voices are amplified. But is it truly equitable partnership? Are they doing it for themselves? Do they themselves realize or take ownership of the work? Or is it that they're doing it because they're part of the project? That is something like I keep questioning. I'm happy that I do see, even if it's small, I do see changes, but is it enough? So if you could reflect on that.
Thank you so much. I don't know, Angel, if you would like to.
I'm a sociologist, so I can just advise a sociological perspective. When you get a project, you need to enter community. I think previously when you were writing the project, you need to know the community you would like to work on with. By what? Try to understanding deeply how the internal dynamic of this community may help to have this prerequisite element before entering. You cannot wait until you get the project and try to see who is the key or who are the key person you're gonna work on it, or who gonna represent or lead the community. This is a kind of anticipation you need to do, knowing the community, knowing the dynamic of the community, try to understand who's the leader, who are the leaders. Sometimes those you think that are the leader are not the leader. Sometimes those who say anything are the one who leads the community. So this is, in terms of approach, a kind of socio-anthropological approach. This is what I can advise. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. Maria, you
I worked for Slum Dwellers International for a time, so I would say just be with those kinds of organizations because they tend to tap community leaders already. And when I was working with them, I feel like it's very evident those who feel inspired to help themselves. I understand that it's on a spectrum. Some people will be working because it's the only job that they can find, and maybe it's not the best, but there are definitely leaders. And I feel like being able to discern and connect and stay, like, keep your attention to these flames of these initial leaders, because when they die off, it's kind of hard to keep going. So I feel like being able to, it's like a leadership problem, being able to discern leadership, being able to cultivate leadership. So I feel very much just key into the persons that you feel are doing the work sincerely.
Thank you, Maria. I want to pitch in very briefly. We have a large migration and health research project in Latin America. And the migration organizations, I don't know who, when, how, came up with the phrase, nothing about migrants without migrants. And it became a mantra in the country. So how we approached it is we asked different migrant communities and organizations, there's many of them, they're also conflictive and et cetera. And what we ended up doing is asking them, what would you like to know? And commonly it was how to find a job, social security, and so it was reciprocal, and there was a togetherness about this joint mission between the research team and the migrant organizations. And that's how we solved many of the research plans. And also we designed part of the method with them. So how is it that we're going to do this? How is it going to work? And they helped us and gave us their ideas on how to do it. And they felt, I don't want to use the word, but it's common in research, the ownership of the research project. And they felt they were gaining something. Go ahead.
Yeah, so one more thing to add. So we as researchers are often in this dilemma that once a research project ends, say it's 5 years, we are leaving the communities, right?
Yeah.
So we cannot, like, just to reach or just for the sake of the research mandate, we cannot keep these communities at risk. So which is why we often have to take those decisions. Like, for example, we did want to target the most marginalized. We wanted to speak to them. But then we realized after 5 years, who's gonna protect them if something goes wrong? We could have forced them to be part of the work. We could have, not forced as in, we could convince them, but what happens after 5 years when we leave the work? So.
Thank you. That's a tough one. Lynn, you want to say something?
Yeah, I also want to caution, maybe just framing the whole thing a bit differently, because what I'm hearing a lot is a damage-centered approach, what you were alluding to also earlier, Irena. Look at it more from an asset-based approach. What are the strengths in the community? You also have to build relationships and trust first before you can go in and work with the community. So it might take some time, it might take several years. So then you work alongside them, these researchers, so that when you leave, there are these people still with the skills and the capacities in order to do the work that you have done behind. Because for me, leadership, and we're all doing leadership here in this room, it's about grooming the next people after us. So when we leave, global health, this is such an endemic problem to global health. We go in, we leave, and then we leave a mess behind. So we have to make sure that when we do something, we are working truly alongside the community. And when we say truly, have we built trust with them? How long do we know them? Who are these people and the dynamics that my colleagues here have been talking about, Angel and David? So I think it's important to build those tiers first and then talk about how we're coming in. Why do we come in? Did someone ask us? Or do we want to come in because we're trying to solve what we think is a problem, when actually we should be taking an asset-based framework?
Thank
Can I
you.
just,
Yeah, sure.
I think Lynn mentioned a very important word that's not been mentioned so far, and that is trust. Okay, that's absolutely critical. And building on what she said before, I come from Indonesia, the same area as Lynn, and when COVID vaccines were first introduced, the big issue was, is it halal? Okay, and this is where the faith-based organizations are absolutely critical. In addition to community, in addition to the government, okay, it was the religious council that had to make a statement to say, this vaccine is halal, it's in the Quran, that your responsibility is to save lives. And it was the end of the controversy. So very important that there is trust in bodies within institutions in the country that do that. Just quickly to share with you, I was part of a survey to try and address vaccine hesitancy amongst the elderly in Indonesia. So we went to this remote village, illiterate lady about 80 years old, and we asked her, why are you not accepting the vaccine? And the reply was very, like a light went off in my head. She said, no, yeah, I don't trust those government doctors who come to tell me that the vaccine is safe and it's gonna save me from dying. I believe those people in my village who speak like me and who look like me. Okay, so once again, that's an issue of trust in terms of getting people to actually change their behaviors.
Thank you, Tiki. You had a question. Oh, Maria, you want to say something?
Just very quickly, because I know that's a urban poor settlement, and I feel like real life experience with it is, when I was in your position, I really did not like the researchers. They would come in, they would be mulat sila sa poverty in the Philippines. They'll have their eat, pray, love moment, and then they'll leave us. I was so angry. So I totally understand, and I'm very empathetic that you don't want to do that. And I think the key thing is you ask the leaders if they want to participate in the study and if you can give them money, because you're taking time away from them doing community work just to answer questions that they've probably answered to other researchers already. So it's, but they are, these are urban poor leaders, and they've been to the UNDP and stuff. When I was an architect with them, I was just the survey person. You know, there's I feel like when we say capacitate, it's also empowerment. You are number 2, they are number 1. I feel like that kind of power dynamic needs to be very clear with you so that you can come in there and really feel like your intersectional privilege does not step down on their economic disadvantages. So yes, but thank you for researching on urban poor. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Do you have a question?
Thank you very much. My name is Amy Steele. I'm an Associate Professor in Public Health from the University of Technology, Sydney, where I'm also co-director of the Australian Research Consortium for Complementary and Integrative Medicine. And I've really enjoyed both the plenary earlier and this conversation today, and I really want to acknowledge the deep engagement with traditional medicine as a topic. One of the things that I'm really interested in hearing your reflections on is that not all traditional knowledge is held as solely as oral knowledge. And this is the case of some of the largest traditional medicine systems in the world. This means engaging with the community and the knowledge experts becomes less of a practical barrier to researchers wanting to exploit that knowledge. I'd love to hear your thoughts on resource mining written texts, essentially bioprospecting documents for covering traditional medicine knowledge for clinical and pharmacological research, and how, particularly as university researchers, what sort of guidance structures or changes need to be made to ensure that that's done in a way that doesn't, using that very first example of colonization, exploit and use these cultures for personal gain with no return back to the culture.
That's a great question. I just want to say one thing regarding that. In Ecuador, it's against the law for anybody in the health sector to conduct research in an indigenous community without signed and stamped permission from the community leader. However, anybody from the social sciences, UNICEF, WHO, International Organization for Migrations, and Coca-Cola, Nestle, and anybody else can go in and do anything they want. And the irony is that potentially some of the health research would be very valuable, and it cannot be conducted. It's almost impossible, especially because they want to protect genomics and all that, and it's great. It's a great tool. I agree with it, but at the same time, it's ridiculous that everybody else is getting information. I just wanted to share this, and it is a law that was enacted because of knowledge extraction, and well, that's the story. I don't know if somebody wants to answer the question.
Can I try? For just like what Lynn said, you have to ask permission to the wisdom body. For example, you're researching a plant, so you have to like pay respect to the plant. Sometimes you wait for a sign that the plant gives you permission to research on it. And the thing is, with anybody who's tried medicinal shrooms, sometimes it doesn't work. Because it's like, you're not ready. We're not allowing you to access anything. So I feel like they also have their own locks and keys. So I feel like the fastest way to get any access is really respect. When you really mentally see yourself bowing down to that energy and be like, please, I want to do this. And then you can feel it open up like a flower and be like, okay, I know now why you're taking it. Because for a lot of foreigners who kind of access very traditional wisdom, it's okay for these spirits, let's just call it that, to feel they know the history. So you can have ancestors that might have raped their lands. They will be like, I don't like you, right? So you need to do rectifications, permissions, respect, pugay, to really kind of gain favor, and then it just slides, and then it flows. That's the energetic perspective. In terms of the law, I totally understand that there can be like more hoops, but sometimes if you give out your intention, there will be other ways for it to descend. So for example, I was doing research on like Irish and Welsh traditions because I had one client who had that kind of lineage, and then suddenly like it just arrived like via YouTube, via random clients who would be like, oh, I also have a Welsh tradition. So have faith that Spirit also wants to teach you, but maybe it's not in the way that you feel like it usually happens. So, yeah.
Do you mind if I just respond quickly to that? And I'd love to hear your take as well. But just to clarify, so I'm actually trained in a European traditional medicine system. So I'm not actually trying to exploit this. We've just done a systematic review of how written traditional knowledge has been used to inform research, and we've found in most situations a lot of the academics writing, they're accessing written texts, they're not actually trained in the traditional medicine system themselves. They've documented no evidence of engaging with someone who's got expertise or qualification in that traditional medicine system. So it's more about what do we need to do to provide some protection to cultures that have a documented history, and therefore there is no requirement at all for anyone to speak to anyone who even speaks the language in order to, beyond maybe transcribing or translating a text, to be able to use that knowledge and exploit it for their own purposes.
Thank you. David, I think you wanted...
I'm going back to the structural, and I think we have to talk a little bit about the intellectual property rights regime that has again evolved over the last 20 or so years, during this neoliberal period. And we can again link this to indigenous cultures, which would see this idea of being able to privatize aspects of the natural world, of nature, as being completely absurd. But that's what we have here. We have, people who have basically colonized dimensions of nature in order to be able to generate, again, profits for private interests. So this expansion of the intellectual property rights regime is a recent phenomenon. It's 2, 3, 4 decades old. It's socially constructed, which means it can be socially deconstructed. But we have accepted intellectual property rights as the norm now. We accept it, and this idea that the patent system, the current IP regime, is necessary to catalyze innovation, completely false. There is no evidence that it does that. In fact, there's evidence that it actually retards innovation. But most people accept the intellectual property rights regime as a given because they believe the narrative that this is the way in which you promote innovation.
If I just want to build upon what David is saying, I agree completely, because we have this extraction mentality. In my society, knowledge is sacred. Like what Maria was saying earlier, it has to be earned. There's a discipleship system. So it's not just simply, just to complicate everything too in the mix, there's also Islamization of my people. For 1400 years, we were Hindus, and then we became Muslim through Malacca, and that spread throughout the Malay Archipelago. But what that meant still was that we still retain many of our traditions, our old traditions, through oral history. So some of those old practices, like being a bomo, which is a shaman, and also martial arts silat, our practices, is being shunned currently by certain sectors of society, because in Malaysia and Indonesia, it's becoming more far right, turning more into Islamization. And so we're losing that. So just to add complexity to the mix, we are also losing that. So I think it's important to question, why are we doing some of this work? Is it really to preserve some of these cultures? And if that's the case, then yes. But is it to do more in order to do extraction? And again, I talk about trust. What is it that we're trying to do? What trust are you going to build with our society, my people, in order for us to give you the knowledge that we've built for centuries to keep our people healthy? And like I said, it's not just about herbal medicine and things like that. It's our whole life. So for example, when I talk about bidan is a way of like taking care of a woman after she gives birth. We do maternal pouches herbal pouches on the head. Martial arts is also not just about martial arts practice, it's about the rituals that we do before and after that has spiritual elements in it, and also what you eat and cannot eat. So it's a whole practice of life that's very, really healthy. And so do we want to give this knowledge to you? What do we get back in return?
Well, Ecuador has the unfortunate honor of, I think he was first, but I just want to say that Ecuador has the unfortunate honor of having, of being responsible for the invention of Alexander von Humboldt. And he is the best example, prime example of what happens when you put in writing indigenous knowledge. So it doesn't go only a few decades back, David. It goes a couple of centuries. You had a question.
Thank you very much. I'm just intrigued and interested in what David said about, the traditional system should study welcome trust now. So I want to give you a small example that I have done myself studying, I think over 15 years ago, I'm a Kenyan, Omar from Kenya. I was taking a flight in my country, in Kenya, on a carrier. It's called Kenya Airways. Then I realized, when I was looking at the seats, from 12, the seat skipped to 14. There was no seat 13. Then I got intrigued, why? What is happening here? Is it a mistake? Is it, the point here is, before I go on, is that some traditional practices are mainstreamed without scientific evidence. So it took me now, again, years of research. And I went on to find, buildings without floor 13. I went ahead to see a lot of, buses without seats 13. And my studies continuing. Last night at dinner, I sat next to table 13. And I can assure you, nobody sat in table 13. And, this is the thing. sorry, I think it's maybe, some cultures is more sensitive around 13. But my point is, some practice are mainstreamed without scientific evidence, and we accept it, isn't it? I mean, right now, an African airline does not have seat 13, row 13. So the point here is sometimes also where that practice comes determines whether it will be mainstreamed or it will be considered a backward, amok superstition. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Emma, you had a question.
Yeah, kia ora, tēnā koutou. It's not actually a question. I just wanted to offer some thoughts to some of the things that I've been hearing. But in the first instance, tēnā koutou.
Emma, could you come a bit closer to the mic?
Tēnā koutou, tēnei te mihi atu kia koutou, ngā rangatira o te wā nei. Māku te mahi hei whakamana tō koutou mātauranga me tō koutou ngākau I tēnei rā. So firstly, I wanted to acknowledge all of you for the work that you're doing and the knowledge that you brought to the space. Knowledge and bravery to the space, so thank you for that today. I just wanted to reflect or recognise, really, I think reflect is a word for the moment, that what I'm hearing a lot is this question, how can I help? And actually that's what we want to hear, is we want to hear our partners ask, how can I help? Sometimes the answer is nothing. There is nothing you can do. But when I say that, I mean you can be the best you can be at what you do. And sometimes you need to just make space for us. And actually more often you need to make more space for us so that we can be in the places that make the change that we need to see happen. Because when you look around this room, I think, or when I think about any room that I'm in, there are still people who are saying, how can I help? But they're still the ones that sit in the position of power, regardless of how much they want to help. So I think the beginning part of how can we do this decolonizing work, whatever it looks like in whichever context it's in, it's where do I fit? And how do I give up the power to the people that need it the most? Kia ora.
Thank you, Emma. I'm going to, we still have 12 minutes. It went fast.
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm a medical student from Ramatibadi Hospital. I'm Nashanon. Ramatibadi Hospital is under Mahidol University. I actually want to hear your perspective on a certain issue. I actually wanted to talk about the spirit of this topic, or decolonizing the knowledge production and utilization from a different angle, actually. Because I think that we can kind of agree, right, that soon there will be a use of artificial general intelligence and also generative AI to actually help create knowledge in the future. And actually, it's right that it has been said that a lot of these data will actually be used to train the models in the future. And a lot of them, as the panel has said, will be from, for example, the West or white male data. And I think that the problem does not only lie at the idea that you only research paper, which is still partly more formal and less prejudiced, but it also will learn from other data, such as the media or other public data, which have certain, for example, linguistic totalitarianism, I would say, or how certain information will be more politically biased, politically left or politically right. But more importantly, there will be some information that will be used to train the data from the big data that actually have some unfounded prejudice or subconscious bias that we can't really even know if we don't use AI. I actually want to hear your opinions about, have there been progress in using things like, for example, computational linguistics in order to help, or like differentiable programming to help determine, for example, to train the data such as these sources are actually, for example, training that certain sources are actually politically left or politically right, and let them learn and let them identify in the future. And maybe it can help us in one way or another, or how we can actually allow it to actually learn by itself. For example, if there are unfounded prejudice in these data that we're going to use or not. Because I actually think that in the future, if we are really going to decolonize knowledge production, we actually have to think about the creation that is going to be of a significant impact, which is through AI too. I want my question, therefore, is actually to think about whether there has been any experience with this. How do you think this will progress? Because the AI definitely will come. And how actually do you think will be the problem if we actually follow along this path? Will it be able to help us really decolonize knowledge production, or perhaps even remove the whole lens through which all our world will have been filtered when we see the subconscious bias in these data? Thank you.
I love your question. It also makes me feel very old because you're so young and looking into the future. Well, Lynn is our AI expert. I don't know, you yes.
I wouldn't say I'm an AI expert. I'm moving slowly into tech.
Our.
Oh, right, okay, the past expert. I think it's a really good question. There are experiments being done on data sets, for example, in the US, looking at left-wing and right-wing actors to see, for example, in the US 2016 elections or 2020 elections, what happened and how was it, was misinformation, disinformation changing the way voters voted. So they had particular data sets and they looked at that. A lot of it was historical, that means past data. So your question is really about future looking at AI, and I think it's a really good question because we have been working in written text. I had mentioned earlier that, of course, in the future, we are already doing trying to capture languages and oral history. That's also happening as we speak. But for me, the fear isn't really about the linguistic and computational aspects of this. All this will happen as you speak. It will continue to happen. But really my fear is not so much this part. It's more really to do with what we call GFM, so generational foundation models. This means in this year, we have 70 elections from around the world. 4 billion people are involved. GFM means, it's a general foundation models again, I'm just gonna repeat it. GFM means that they will try and look to see what you like on social media. You like this particular post on Facebook, you like this particular post on Instagram. I'm gonna try and make my messaging very niche and keep repeating it and iterating it until they got to the point where I will actually get your vote, your okay, that you actually will like my candidate. That's what I'm more worried about, because generative AI, people are more worried about deep fakes or more obvious issues. The less obvious thing is about the messaging. Generative AI will make it much easier for us to do disinformation at a large scale, at low cost, at high speed. And in a year where there's so many elections taking place around the world, I think it's really of high concern. For those who think I'm wrong, you can come and speak to me afterwards.
Thank you, Lynn. No, we don't want to cross you, Lynn.
No, I have to pay to catch too, but yeah.
Angela, I think you want to say something.
Thanks so much for your relevant question. I'm going to answer based on global perspective and based on the knowledge production. I think with the, even of, let's say, the feature of the AI, we don't need to be in a position where we have to do something right now in order just to fit with. But for me, it's important to, first of all, produce the alternative knowledge, meaning exactly try to give the voice to those who don't have the voice, collect this data, produce this kind of knowledge. So based on this alternative, the AI may work on it. So we will just have new concepts, new meaning that help to give meaning and sense to what we can use besides the knowledge, standard knowledge we have today. Without alternative in production of knowledge, I don't even see how we can just solve this problem of decolonizing production of knowledge and privileging new knowledge. That won't be the concurrency of what we have, but give people the alternative, different way of understanding things may also help those who want it, use it in the future of the AI.
Thank you, Angel. Mori, there's an idea for you. Transdisciplinary research into the humanities and the world of wisdom.
I think the key thing there, just to say a bit about what Angela is saying, is making sure that we have the bridging tools for communities that we work with, so that they're able to harness the work that we're saying. So whatever knowledge that we build, the bridging tools, the communities themselves, our communities themselves must be able to use the AI tools. So there must be a medium in between. And these meeting structures are not being built enough right now. So we need more of those, and then they need to be adapted to our languages. And then this is how we're going to make sure that the global health knowledge or new evidence and things that are coming in will also benefit our communities in a way that they understand.
Thank you, Lynn. I think everybody's eager to respond. Tiki, are you also pitching it? But go ahead, David.
So AI, I wish you hadn't brought this up. I did actually publish something in BMJ Global Health on AI and its interface with public health. And what we tried to do in that article was to try and describe how AI is really a form of power. It's a new form of power. There's the computational power that can be applied to all kinds of things. There's the scary ability of applying AI to weapons, its ability to enhance surveillance systems. So, you know, there's a whole bunch of ways in which AI can be used as a form of power to reinforce and reproduce existing inequalities. And that's, I think, the biggest fear I have about AI. I think in the health field, we are all too upbeat about the potential positive benefits of AI, of which there are many. But if we don't think about the bigger picture and think about who is going to be able to use AI as a form of power, then I think, you know, we'll be missing a trick, and we'll be in danger of actually enabling the use of AI for the malign purposes for which it can be used. And I think at a philosophical level, there is also an issue about what we're doing to humanity and civilization with the creation of artificial intelligence. Yeah, I mean, what does it mean to create something that is designed to be more intelligent than ourselves? And again, I don't think we are discussing that adequately enough.
Intelligent but never wise. Is that correct, Maria?
Maybe. I kind of have a different perspective, but I'm gonna try to make it digestible. When wise people write things, there's an energy behind them. You literally sit with the text and it goes inside of you. There are some people who are very sensitive to it. They can see colors, it's moving. And in our information age, we can replicate all of those paintings, all of those texts, all of these bodies of wisdom, almost like they're twins, or almost like they're zombies. There's like triplicates of them and like kaleidoscopes of them. And it can be quite distracting, but also empowering. So I just want to say that the texts that come from AI have no energy. Literally, like empty. There's nothing that's moving behind it. And like I have a podcast and I asked it to like make blurbs for it. I was like, wow, this is so dead. And I feel like if I were to take your perspective, what I would move from is that we are in the information age where video, where text, where we can aggregate a lot of data. So it's more of a question of what do we do when we meet more of each other because we see more videos of each other, more information of each other, more aggregates of each other? How do we handle all of this information? So I feel like it becomes, yeah, it just goes back to how do you handle more information and how do you temper it into wisdom? And honestly, I really want to say that a lot of populations that get more information, but not, you know, those typical, when there's kids, you don't show them an iPad because their body won't develop properly. So things like that. I think about that when we talk about AI, that we're consuming so much information, but are we getting better at the martial arts, at the yoga, at our somatics? Are we getting better at transforming collective trauma on a body level? Are we getting better at co-resonating in large groups since we're traveling so often, since we're traveling on our phones? So I feel like there's just this, it's happening already. And then we just need to develop our skills on these other levels to be able to meet that flood of energy and that flood of information and be able to shape the conversation in a way that's productive, or a way that's actually creative. And I do want to say for people who are like, oh, spirits don't mess with tech because they're not technical. I promise you, every time I record like a ritual or a meditation, my laptop would die because it's not built for that kind of thing. So I would teach my mentees to consecrate their laptops because it's not built for that kind of energy. So I do want to say that it exists. It exists through these things. So yeah, it's a little, yeah, but I hope that was helpful.
Thank you, Maria. Tiki, you have the honor of giving the last words, and we will do the mic drop. Don't forget to fill out the forms, or the spirits will go after you.
Yeah, just very quickly, a bit out of my depth when it comes to AI, but I agree with everything that has been said. From my perspective as an infectious disease microbiologist, I absolutely don't doubt the power of AI. For example, in drug discovery, in trying to figure out how proteins fold in terms of designing new vaccines. My biggest concern is actually the power of generative AI to disseminate fake news, misinformation, and disinformation. If that happens during the next pandemic and it affects vaccine uptake, that is going to be a disaster bigger than COVID. So I have a real concern about the power of AI in fake news, misinformation, disinformation. Thank you.